two main reasons crop up. The first reason is because information was not proactively offered to some of them. One teacher said, quote, "The grades were never explained to me for the years I joined service," unquote. The second reason is that even when some teachers ask about the process, they are given no explanation. One teacher sought to understand why they received that grade, but their RO said there was no way to discuss the performance grade. There are many more stories like these. How can anyone do better if they don't know what they're doing wrong? I think we can all empathize with how frustrating it must be to be in a situation like this. Again, there's more we can do. MOE can implement a standard procedure of how schools respond when teachers request feedback and clarifications about their grade. Second, this standard procedure needs to be enforced. As the data shows, a large majority of teachers currently see the appraisal exercise as lacking in transparency. We must make proper communications mandatory and enforce this. Third and finally, we can work with the teachers to strengthen MOE's communication policies. We can implement a whistleblowing mechanism for teachers to use when their schools are failing to abide by MOE's communication policies on appraisal. Of course, this mechanism must include measures to protect teachers. Minister Lawrence has said that schools have the flexibility for assigning grades. However, in practice, virtually all schools had teachers with C-, D or E grades, as Minister later shared. This may be because of the additional paperwork, scrutiny, and justifications needed to exercise the flexibility. I propose to remove the quotas. Let schools assign grade based on a standardized process, as I proposed earlier. Over 80% of teachers surveyed supported the removal of the quota. The risk of fiscal imprudence is limited, as each school is given a fixed quantum of monies for performance bonuses. Standardizing the process, as well as the existing practice of having a cluster superintendent advise each ranking panel, are both powerful checks to guard against grade inflation. MOE would not be alone in this shift. Some of the most successful companies in the world have dropped relative ranking and moved towards more flexible performance management system. Amazon announced in 2016 that it would drop its stack ranking system. Even General Electric, the American conglomerate where stack ranking was popularized in the 1980s, has dropped it. Its current CEO says he prefers, quote, "reviews that candidly tell an employee where they're not measuring up and what they need to do to improve, without rigidly adhering to certain percentages," unquote. General Electric has shifted to a system that emphasizes continuous dialogue and shared accountability. I also propose that we remove the punitive measures for the C- grade. 75% of teachers surveyed agreed with this. Performance management should be formative, not punitive. Teachers who struggle should not be denied the full resources to grow or the full prospect of being rewarded. 3 years with zero chance of promotion is enough to make anyone lose interest in the profession. Why would we disincentivize hard work like that? What I hope for is that our teachers spend more time improving their own performance and aspire to become better teachers instead of spending time worrying about how they are compared to others. Madam, I'm not the first MP to speak on this. This has been a long fight by MP Denise Phua and former MPs Zainal Sapari and Intan Mokhtar. Dr. Intan said previously that, quote, "our appraisal system is quite summative," unquote, and spoke about the need for a more formative approach to the appraisal. MP Denise spoke about the negative aspect of forced ranking, speaking of instances where employees get pushed up in terms of their ranking because of very vocal supervisors who are able to speak up for them at ranking sessions. In the last few months, I've heard these exact concerns surface repeatedly by our teachers. Mr. Sapari, a veteran in the education service, first as a teacher, then a school principal, then a cluster superintendent. He asked for the forced ranking system to be abolished and instead adopt a criteria-based approach for ranking. Mr. Sapari, Dr. Intan, and Ms. Phua have been speaking about this since 2018. In the previous debate, Ms. Phua said, quote, "to run a race whereby only a few win the trophy might be a race I think the minister has been asking us not to run. We should run races where as many as possible can make it to the finish line and as many as possible can meet a good or great performance standard," unquote. We all want what Ms. Denise Phua is calling for, but it's simply not possible under our current appraisal system. Let me end with a quote as always. Quote, "a teacher plants the seed of knowledge, sprinkles them with love, and patiently nurtures their growth to produce tomorrow's dreams," unquote. So as teachers work hard to create a nurturing environment for our children, let's also create a nurturing environment for them. Let's make our appraisal system more standardized, transparent, fair, and formative. The surveys show that the majority of teachers support this call. But, Madam, I know our performance management system or stack ranking is a sacred cow. We have used this system for decades, but for once, I'm not asking for a sacred cow to be slaughtered. As a vegetarian, I very much prefer that. I'm asking for us to look after this sacred cow better, and for our appraisal system, again, to be more standardized, transparent, fair, and formative. With a strong, engaged, and empowered teaching workforce, we will continue to emerge stronger. Thank you.
To one result.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise in support of the budget. Now, 2020 was a tough and disruptive year, with the pandemic adding complexity to our lives, our livelihoods, and our norms. Thus, I'm grateful for the relief and assistance provided by the government to cushion the impact of COVID-19. This year, while the fight against COVID-19 continues, and we know it is far from over, we are indeed in a better position to emerge stronger together. I move for us to consider, or rather reconsider, some of the important lessons learned. The COVID aspects of social media. I've seen how both youths as well as adults are belittled online by their peers and the damaging effects of cyberbullying. Now, as a father myself, I'm worried for our children who might be vulnerable and having their mental well-being affected. Now, collectively, mental health issues become more apparent and intervention is much needed in times like this. We need to make concrete and concerted efforts to support those with mental health issues beyond mere awareness and promote positive mental well-being. I call again for these 4 strategies. First, to enhance mental health literacy, as well as digital literacy programs in our schools. Second, to create more accessible touch points so that those who feel that they need help, they are able to do so easily. Third, including mental health screening as part of our physical health screening. And this should not be limited to just schools or workplaces, but also within our community so that our seniors may also receive help. Lastly, to introduce timeouts at workplaces and in schools so that those who are under stress may take the option to take a mental break. But such breaks are recorded, and the next time one takes it, we know that they may have something that we need to help with. Now, the strategies I presented requires a whole of community effort. Madam, mental health is not a life sentence. It is not something that one has to go through alone. There are ways for us to overcome these challenges. Early mitigation would certainly help, but we need to do it together. We can only emerge stronger together as a united society, not only in terms of social or economic factors, but also in terms of our mental health. Madam Speaker, the collapse of certain sectors and the streamlining of the workforce brought upon by COVID-19 has exposed the inability of some of our fresh graduates to be agile in a volatile job environment. Now, recently I had a chat with a resident who is about to finish his diploma in aerospace engineering. Now, as the industry is deeply impacted by the pandemic, it's natural that he was feeling anxious. He expressed that he felt that he made the wrong decision when choosing the course. That should not be the case. In my maiden speech, I highlighted that early specialization constrains skill sets and limits opportunities. I emphasized the need for broad skills that can be generalized across other disciplines so that we can put our fresh graduates on a better footing and give them the confidence to apply their technical skills across other relevant sectors. I call for MOE to continuously review pathways to prepare our graduates with the agility to navigate through the varied and diversified workforce and discover their passion. I also call to review how we can ease the progression from secondary school to ITEs or the polytechnics so that anyone who has a passion for a certain field, they are allowed to seize it. Now, I've taught many students from the Polytechnic Foundation Program, the PFP, and many have done very well. In fact, they do even better than the ones who come in through the O-level system or route. And I felt that because they enter the Polytechnic slightly earlier than the rest, it allows them that time and space not only to settle down, but to chart their education journey better. Now, finally, I hope that we continue to review the curriculum in IHLs so that it remains robust and most importantly relevant, working closely with the community and industry to ensure that every Singaporean is future ready and remains employable. Madam Speaker, my final point is on the support for our healthcare workers. Without doubt, our healthcare workers deserve all the accolades that come their way. I would like to thank them for their sacrifice and their hard work and hope that the proposed increase in salary laid out in the budget will spur them even further. But we know it's not all about money. Nursing is inherently a very demanding profession and entails long hours and overnight schedules.
For those suffering from mental issues to seek immediate help. Third, to introduce mental health screening in the current physical health checks. And lastly, introduce time out to students and workers who are suffering from stress or mental issues. Besides mental health, I also touch on diversifying pathways in education. With the pandemic in our midst, many of our students are concerned about their future job prospects in the future. I would like to highlight the need for educational institutions to offer skills that can be practiced in all fields of work. It will make our graduates more competitive as well as provide better confidence and opportunities in getting jobs in the future. Lastly, is the support system for healthcare sector employees. We are proud that our nurses understand their professional jobs and continue to be excellent in their job. And we would like to say thank you on their sacrifices and hard work. I welcome the increase in wages for the sector workers and health workers as presented in the budget. However, other than wage support, attention should also be given in terms of career development to widen the opportunities to increase their skills. In the end, and to me, what is important is to give them protection from stresses and disruption that they may face when they are doing their job. I would like to guarantee the community that the PAP MPs will continue and to be concerned to all concerned holistically. In my Facebook posting on M to the power of 3 in Jalan Besar, I quoted the Malay proverb uttered by Prime Minister Mr. Lee Hsien Loong in 2018, tied up like a bunch of bitter leaves, clustered like a bunch of lemongrass. This year's budget provides support to all levels of society. Only when we stay united and help one another will we can become a community of success and emerge stronger together.
Parliamentary Secretary Eric Chua.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the budget for the upcoming fiscal year is a continuation of the government's promise to secure lives and livelihoods to outlast the pandemic. It also takes a longer view of building a sustainable home for our future generations. While I applaud our bid to support businesses, workers, and families in a more targeted fashion, I would like to sound the alarm on two issues. First, on our youth's state of mental well-being, particularly against the backdrop of COVID-19. Second, on how we could take better care of a smaller but no less important segment of our society, our differently abled youth. First, on youth mental well-being. The 2016 Singapore Mental Health Study found that 1 in 7 persons has experienced a mood, anxiety, or alcohol use disorder in his or her lifetime. This was a marked increase from the same study conducted in 2010, where 1 in 8 persons was found to have suffered from some form of mental disorder. Also noteworthy in the 2016 study was the finding that young people stood out as a demographic group more vulnerable to mental disorders. And the same survey also found that a large majority, in fact 78% of people with mental illness did not seek help. Now, stigma could have driven them away from seeking help. As many as 7 in 10 think that persons with mental health conditions experience discrimination in their daily lives, according to a 2017 NCSS study on attitudes towards persons with mental health conditions in Singapore. Overall, there's still a lack of understanding of mental health conditions, with 1 in 3 persons expressed carry on with public performances on several nights, which then at the time form a big part of her assessment at vocational school. Finally, she sought help. She was diagnosed with depression and the lesser-known premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD. Now, looking back, Courtney's main regret was that no one around her, and not even herself, had recognized that she had mental health issues. The lack of awareness and stigma makes it hard for the community to identify such issues, much less to respond. And it also makes it much harder for medical professionals to even get a chance to help. Courtney is blessed as her parents have stood by her all this while, supporting her even in her darkest hours. For Courtney, the key issue now is to help youngsters suffering silently from mental health issues to normalize help seeking. And this work is even more urgent now, given the backdrop of the global pandemic. COVID-19 reached our shores a year ago and has left the world grappling with the havoc it has wreaked on lives and livelihoods. For our youth, whether they're coping with home-based learning or transitioning from student to working adult life, the pandemic has only made already stressful rites of passages even more daunting. In fact, a National Youth Council survey found mental health a consistent challenge that youth face during the pandemic. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope members of this House will agree with me that the time to act is now. We need to do more to help our young ones struggling with mental health issues, and we need to do so sooner rather than later. I will next talk about a group of youth that's also close to my heart, but for different reasons, our differently abled youth. Before I proceed, I would like to declare that I'm volunteering as a board member with the Very Special Arts, VSA, Singapore, a charity that empowers youth with disabilities to pursue and realize their potential in the arts through continuing education. After DPM Heng's budget speech last Tuesday, I reached out to a group of VSA's parents Many of them applaud the Inclusive Support Program pilot, which will see the integrated provision of early intervention and early childhood services so that we can better help children with developmental needs upstream. However, the consensus was also that not only can we do more to better serve youth with disability, we can do it quite differently, especially when they complete formal education at 18. I'd like to focus on 3 issues, namely education, employment, and housing. Firstly, education. Raising a child is a lot of work. I know that from my own experience in the past 8 months, but I can only imagine the financial, emotional, logistical demands that parents of differently abled children face. Roger, father of 19-year-old Floyd, a young man with autism, shared with me, and I quote, "Many fail to realize that it is more costly to raise a child with special needs. Often, in such families, only one parent works because the other parent remains at home to continue teaching life skills to the child until they are independent and socially appropriate." Unquote. Sally, mother to 19-year-old Amelia, a young woman with mild autism and mild dyslexia, shared with me that education for children with disabilities can be expensive. The monthly fees for a Singapore citizen to receive an education in a mainstream MOE secondary school is $25. In contrast, the monthly fee for an autistic student at a Pathlight school is $250. When Amelia was going through school some years back, her monthly fee at Pathlight then, at the time, was $500. As Amelia has mild dyslexia, Sally had to fork out an additional $400 a month for programs at the Dyslexia Association of Singapore, or in all, $900 a month for Amelia's education. Now, to be sure, the gap between fees for an education in mainstream versus special education or SPED schools has closed over the years. And there are financial assistance schemes available in both mainstream as well as SPED schools to ensure that no child is denied an education. However, could we do more to help so these families are not unnecessarily burdened with financial strains just because they have a differently abled child? And could we also allow them to utilize their Skills Futures credit to pursue A, continuing education, such as those offered at the very special arts, or B, for speech, occupational, or psychotherapy, services of which many will need well into children will be able to fend for themselves long after they depart from this world. This is also what Diana, mother of 25-year-old Aaron, a young man diagnosed with autism, related to me. As many in this community work part-time, parents worry over whether their child will be able to afford a roof over their heads. In December last year, HDB announced the launch of Singapore's first assisted living flats for seniors. Could we not consider a similar housing option for this community, in addition to existing options such as adult disability homes? Madam Deputy Speaker, Roosevelt famously once said, "We cannot build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." So, build our youth we must. Not just on hard skills that will allow them to compete with their peers in the global marketplace, but also on softer skills of resilience, inner strength, and overall well-being. As we progress as a society in the grand course of history, let us all be kinder to one another and not forget the vulnerable ones amongst us. Notwithstanding the points I've raised above, Madam Deputy Speaker, I support the budget.
Deputy Leader.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of Leader, may I seek your consent and the general assent of members to move a motion to take the proceedings on the business set down on the order paper for today beyond the moment of interruption, please.
I give my consent. Does the Deputy Leader have the general assent of the honourable members present to so move?
Deputy Speaker,
Leader.
I beg to move that the proceedings on the business set down on the order paper for today be proceeded beyond the moment of interruption.
The question is that the motion moved by the Deputy Leader, as many as are of the opinion, say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Sakyandi.
Madam Speaker, I thank DPM for its fair, inclusive and sustainable budget with a focus on supporting future growth. Today we are in the recovery stage because Singaporeans have worked very hard collectively to keep us safe and make the best of the pandemic. Madam Speaker. Today we are in a recovery stage because Singaporeans have worked very hard collectively to keep us safe and make the best of the pandemic. We must push ahead with the momentum so that we don't let these efforts go to waste. In my speech today, I will speak briefly about one key area to leverage on further opportunities and change. I will share my concerns on immediate challenges pertaining to cost of living, particularly the petrol duties hike. Finally, I'll round up my budget speech with my thoughts on our fiscal plans. Manufacturing plays a key role in our post-COVID economic strategy. The sector currently accounts for about 21%, or $106 billion of our total gross domestic product. It also hires around 12% of the workforce. COVID-19 has also propelled the demand for digital services and smart technology. This has led to an immense interest in smart manufacturing. The concept of digital twinning, in particular, has become increasingly valuable in transforming industrial operations in an era where remote working is encouraged and safe distancing required to limit the number of physically present workers. The digital twin captures insights on key operations at manufacturing plant, allowing employees to respond by remotely reconfiguring processes and mitigating problems in real time. There's also heightened demand for collaborative robots in healthcare and manufacturing. Post-COVID-19, smart manufacturing is expected to be worth $220.4 billion by 2025. And the government plans to grow our manufacturing sector by 50% over the next 10 years. The goal is to pave the way for qualitative transformation, with advanced manufacturing forming a larger portion of the sector. This is good news, but two key problems continue to plague the sector over the years. First, how can we accelerate digitalization in more of our manufacturing companies beyond the existing grants and programs? Maybe we can help more of our companies embrace digital twinning technology, raise productivity in our current environment now. Second, retaining talent and speeding up our capability transfer programs. Companies also require talents onto the more immediate concerns of the public, cost of living. Domestic inflation will eventually go up as the global and domestic economy recovers, and following that, global easing by central banks will eventually be removed. This is likely to be a global concern in the next few years if the COVID situation improves. The inflation forecast for OECD countries is set to rise gradually to 1.8% by end of 2022. Domestically, inflation was negative during the pandemic, but projected to climb up to around 1.5% in 2025. I would like to thank DPM for not raising the GST this year, and there is the GST $6 billion assurance package announced last year, which will help to offset GST increase for low-income households for up to 10 years and 5 years for middle-income households. As our economy is currently in the recovery stage, new jobs are created, job support scheme continues for hard-hit sectors, and there are real wage increases over time, especially if additional sectors identified for the progressive wage model. So Singaporeans need not be too worried about inflation for now. Madam Speaker, in Malay. Tuan Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the more immediate concern is actually the potential rise in inflation. With a hike in petrol duty of up to 23%, as announced during the budget, there will be an increase of 10 to 15 cents per litre effective 17 February. Even though the petrol component is only 1.9% of the weight in the CPI basket, the rise in energy prices and the new hikes will only add 0.1 to 0.2 percent points to the headline inflation. However, for the men in the street, it is seen as another price, and they are wondering why has it to be now. And they understand that we need to go for car light and clean fuel. To ease, apart from that, we are also the increase of petrol duties in 2015 and also in 2017 and 2019. I am also concerned that this is a small hike compared to the 2015 hike. However, for the normal layman, it is still a hike, and those who drive or ride motorcycles for their livelihood, like the delivery riders and ride-hailing drivers, are the hardest hit. As we have come to ease the transition, the government is giving a 15% road tax rebate to owners of private cars for 1 year, while motorcycle owners will get 60% road tax rebate. For those who are using it as a livelihood, the government is also giving some offset to ease it. For those who are of low income and medium, they will be helped with many social schemes, and these are funded by our tax, including petrol duties. I'm also worried that it is also put aside for the Budget 2021 household support package consisting of GST vouchers, S and CC rebates, CDC, and vouchers and top-ups for school-going children, who will also go some way to ease the increase in cost of living. Nonetheless, to achieve long-term change and encourage motorists to go green, I urge the government to help those affected, like motorcycle owners, to transit to electric or hybrid vehicles in the next 5 to 10 years. Last year, government relaxed rules on electric motorcycles, allowing high-powered motorbikes on the roads as part of efforts to encourage usage of cleaner vehicles. However, in March 2020, we have only seen 2 registrations. And the significant, out of a total of 14,000, the significantly higher cost of electric motorcycles compared to its petrol-powered equivalent is a deterrent. Electric motorcycles also have a long charging time of 6 to 8 hours on average for a full charge. Our push towards EV charging stations, I hope, will also involve seamless ability to charge motorcycles. In Norway, which is known for being the world leader on EV penetration and sales rate, the government incentivized EV ownership by removing the 25% sales tax from new EV purchases in 2001. So is it possible for the government to work together with the locals to obtain reasonable price vehicles for for our delivery riders? Can the government also work?
On the other hand, this makes us vulnerable to speculation, currency speculation, and attacks. We have seen such attacks during the Asian financial crisis in 1997-1998, impacting our economy and jobs. In fact, I started looking for a job right smack in the aftermath of the speculative attacks on some currencies in the Asian region during the Asian financial crisis in 1998, right after school. And let me tell you, it was not easy back then. The impact then on sentiment, the economy, and jobs in Asia and Singapore was bad. As a financial center, there's also the risk of capital flows if our currency is attacked for speculative reasons. I don't think we want to add in the additional element of this risk into the equation for our Singaporean job seekers. So publicizing data from our reserves is akin to revealing the size of our ammunition to hedge funds and speculators out there with large pool of funds to play with. Not only that, other market participants may also join the bandwagon and ride that speculation. And those are in, not just in billions, the potential it could be even higher. The potential risks and downsides outweigh the benefits of transparency. Our geopolitical context is also vastly different from other countries that publicize details about their reserves, like Norway. Norway's monetary policy is that of an inflation targeting regime to achieve low and stable inflation. Norway's policy rate is the interest rate on banks' overnight deposit rates in the Norges Bank, and its currency is free floating. And remember, for Singapore, I mentioned earlier, Singapore uses its exchange rate, not its interest rates. In Norway, its petrol-driven economy is also very different from ours, and with a VAT of up to 25% value-added tax. It is in stark contrast to our GST rate. So with vastly different economic considerations, it is not wise to compare and say that we too should disclose our reserves just because others did. I would also remind that transparency is practice where it is safe and sensible to do so, and it isn't true that our reserves are completely undisclosed. For example, Temasek and MAS fund sizes are made public. Only GIC's is not. Madam Speaker, as a member of this House, I would like to explicitly indicate my concerns about any moves to be more transparent on our reserves. Yes, Honourable Member Hazel Poa asked for the total reserves data from an economic fiscal prudence angle. So what is the amount and how it should be used? It is understandable that people want to know. But foreign actors, currency speculators, and anyone who does not wish us well is also interested to know. And I mentioned, people may join the bandwagon. So there are trade-offs. So the government has to weigh in balance. The balance struck is that the government does not disclose a lot, but disclosed a lot already, but not all. And I'm glad it is done delicately, and so delicately, by a responsible government. It would be prudent that we do not make unnecessary moves to reveal our total reserves, though sincere in its intent for more information, that it can unwittingly lead to significant negative economic outcomes, given our domestic context. The results of decades of sound monetary and fiscal policies are evident in the resilience of our economy, which has weathered multiple storms over the decades. So once again, I would like to explicitly state and indicate my concerns about any moves to be more transparent on our reserves. Since we are on the topic of reserves, Madam Speaker, I would also like to comment on the suggestion of the Honourable Member, Mr. Leong Man Wai, to use all the NRIC and not just 50%. I would be seriously concerned if the government were to do this. The current 50 to 50% divide was explained by PM when the framework was first introduced in 2008. It was to have fairness between the present and future generations, even though it is not an exact science. 50% for now, this generation, and 50% plot back for future generations. If we use all now, there is little, if anything, left in terms of NRIC for the younger generation, the younger and future generations to come. Importantly, by plowing back 50%, we continue to grow our reserves, and that's important, while at the same time allowing the government to tap on part of the investment income.
If we were off our fundamentally determined exchange rates, we could encourage market participants to actually engage in speculative activity that will get us back on to our fundamental exchange rate. And this, in fact, was a point that was routinely argued by the inventor of the band basket crawl system, John Williamson, for which we, the MAS at least, subscribes to, the BBC system. The second point I would like to point out is that actually, while it is convenient to argue that we have a distinct system in terms of exchange rate policy. By purchasing power parity, all exchange rate policy is in fact monetary policy. So even though it is the case that we target explicitly the exchange rate, it will have implications for inflation. And hence, when other countries, as the member has cited, such as Norway, reveal that they have a certain amount of reserves and they are subscribers to an inflation targeting regime, it is not, in fact, distinct from our own exchange rate targeting regime.
Mrs. Sakyandi, do you want to respond?
So, the Honourable Professor James Lim, if I can try to recall your first question and second, I'll probably take your second question first. Second question is about, if I can recall again, Professor, you asked whether on the first one there is stabilizing and destabilizing currency at speculative attacks.
I'm suggesting that
And it's stabilizing.
that speculation can both be destabilizing as well as stabilizing.
Okay, so I just want to share with you. I started off working in the MAS back in 98, 99. The impact of the currency attacks can never be stabilizing. It has ramifications on the economy. It has ramifications on jobs. But back in the Asian financial crisis, the impact on the currencies that were specifically attacked, like Thailand, and even to some extent other countries in ASEAN region, was very significant, to the point that the currencies depreciated so much and that it led to the ramifications and cascading effects on the economy. So what I saw in the Asian financial crisis, which is a perfect example of a speculative attack, led to economic ramifications that are not destabilizing at all. And that's from my own lived experience in 1998, 1999. Not theory. So the theoretical element that you shared from a theory perspective, that there can be a destabilizing impact of currency adjustments or misalignments. Can be stabilizing. Maybe in theory does not make sense as well, unless you're talking about misalignments in the long run that eventually corrects itself in time. Yeah. So that's the first question.
Yeah, if I may clarify, I should point out that I am, in fact, old enough to have also lived through the Asian financial crisis, and I'm aware of the conditions surrounding it. So this is not just in theory, it was also my lived experience.
Okay. Your second question, Professor James?
The monetary policy is the same. Norway's policy.
Norway's policy. How is it different from the Singapore's policy? If I may put it in general terms?
No, I was pointing out that I did not think that there were distinct policies, because all exchange rate policy is in fact monetary policy, and I'm wondering if you could clarify why you thought they were distinct.
Let me try to explain to you.
Okay, Mr. Sakyandi, can you just, can the two of you just speak to the chair and just clarify the point?
Yeah. Madam Speaker, to answer the question about the difference between Norway's monetary policy and Singapore's monetary policy, they're very distinct. I mentioned in my speech about the different economic context of Norway, where it's a petrol-driven economy, and where Singapore is a very trade-driven economy. And the reliance of using exchange rate as a controllable intermediate target in the Singapore economy is very distinct from Norway, which uses a policy rate, interest rate or deposit rates in its central bank. So the instrument being used, I think the important issue here when we're talking about reserves, in this situation for Singapore, when Singapore uses exchange rate as its policy tool, there is a direct intervention in the markets using currency spot to have a direct impact on the Sing dollar. And that is very specific because we target the exchange rate. If you look at Norway, Norway uses policy rates and its exchange rate is freely floated. So for Singapore's case, the very fact that we target an intermediate target of an exchange rate has some impact in terms of our ability to directly intervene in the markets and thus run down on our reserves.
To smoking. The decision to vaccinate is not just personal to holder, doesn't just impact you as an individual. It's a matter of life or death for loved ones, friends, fellow countrymen, especially those who, because of medical reasons, are unable to be vaccinated. And we have invested significantly in this endeavor. So let's be bold. We can't be willy-nilly about it. If we believe in it, that it works, we should stand by it. And therefore, it should be conditionally opt-out rather than voluntarily opt-in. Because only when we control this enemy, this virus, can the bold moves that this budget and its intent bear fruit. On the topic of fruits, I now move to the kitchen larder. We've been drawing from our reserves in the last 2 years. Difficult but needed decisions. It's a bit like taking a cookie out of the cookie jar. It's really tempting after that first delicious cookie to keep reaching in cookie after cookie. Soon, you end up like the Cookie Monster, forever tempted when you see a cookie. I've been listening quite intently to many of the alternative suggestions that have been put forward in this House over the last 2 days. And I imagine that for the Minister for Finance, it's a tremendously difficult task. From the opposite bench, many of the suggestions seem to indicate that everything can be easily funded because it's only X% of the GDP. Very easy one. Can be done. But if we take all these suggestions together, X% here, Y% there, Z% somewhere else, it adds up significantly. That's a whole lot of cookies to be given out. So right now, while there's a lot of cookies that we're eating, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of cookie making. Our honourable friends from the Workers' Party seem to say that eat away, not everything, be careful, but here's a little chocolate chip and sprinkles while you're at it. And if we run low, instead of buying the ingredients, the government should make more, yet not what is necessary to provide the ingredients to make the cookies. Our colleagues from the PSP, on the other hand, over the last 2 days seem to indicate we should take everything from the jar, everything, including the crumbs. However, no one wants to say how much it would cost, nor be the one to be buying the ingredients.
Yes,
and
Mr.
bake the
Pritap.
cookies.
Sorry, Mr. Alex Yam. Yes, Mr. Singh.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Rules of debate, it's of course up to the member if he wants to give way. I just wanted to ask whether Mr. Alex Yam could identify which WP members made the points that he's suggesting, so that they can rebut him later on in the course of the debate.
I will come to that. But no one wants to say how much it would cost, nor be the one to buy the ingredients and bake those cookies. That big elephant in the room, of course, is GST. We cannot be constantly asking for more without being cogent of the cost. Funding from recurrent tax ensures that all that we're doing is sustainable. With GST, we have also built in buffers for the low income. Over and above that, as the Honourable Member, Mr. Saktiandi, pointed out earlier, we also amended the GST Voucher Fund Act in March 2020, just under a year ago, to cushion the impact of any GST increases for all Singaporeans, both low-income and middle-income families. With these, we also give time for incomes to catch up so that we can deal with long-term cost of living. The challenges that we face are many and varied, including an aging society that will propel increases in many areas, including, most importantly, healthcare costs. It's not just us that are facing these challenges. Hong Kong and Singapore are very similar cities, because ultimately the responsibility of a responsible government is to do the right thing, even if occasionally unpopular. Populism and opportunism will, however, all but turn us into cookie monsters, always dipping into the cookie jar. I'm sure the Minister of Finance is open to many other suggestions on how we can fund these programs and yet remain sustainable as an economy and balance our fiscal position. And if there is one that works as an alternative, I'm certain it will take the biscuit. Much has been said over the last 2 days by both sides of the House. Many new suggestions, all of which will cost us. The Minister of Finance has to decide which are for the long-term good of the country and which will take us to the next mile. All of us have the good of Singapore at heart. We differ perhaps greatly on our ideas, but at the end of the day, we need to take responsible decisions to bring Singapore forward. With that, I support the motion.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member, Mr. Alex Yam, for his comments. Just a couple of clarifications on his cookie jar metaphor. He mentioned that when we draw upon the reserves, or when we suggest that the rules governing the use of the reserves should be changed, this is akin to sort of taking cookies from the cookie jar. I think the member is well aware that in 2008, I believe, the government itself, the PAP government, amended the rules governing the use of the reserves to create the NIR framework, and in 2015 those rules were amended again to include Temasek into that framework. Would the member, is it the member's position or argument that those were really raiding the cookie jar as well in 2008 and 2015? So that's kind of my first point. Secondly, it's really to ask the Honourable Member, is it the member's view that any kind of deviation away from these rules that are currently entrenched in the Constitution, in the current rules, amounts to sort of raiding the cookie jar and becoming a cookie monster, even if those rules are slowing the slope of the growth of the reserves, but do not actually draw upon and pull down the reserves, but they merely slow the growth from this sort of a slope, for example, to this sort of a slope, for example? Is that being a cookie monster? So that is my second question. My third question would be really to ask, over time, over decades, as the absolute amount of reserves relative to GDP changes, does the member not acknowledge that, these rules should also evolve and change? And as society changes and the needs of society changes and, opportunities to invest in the people in the country change, shouldn't those rules also be subject to change as well? I'd just like to invite the Honourable Member, Mr. Yam, to agree with that general philosophic point. Thank you.
Mr. Alex Yam.
Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his supplementary questions and clarifications. I agree, because that's what I made as a closing point in my speech. We all have the good of Singapore at heart. We may disagree with the route to get there. But on the first point, yes, as we go along, we make adjustments. We make adjustments such as introducing the NIR. But as was described earlier, we put in measures to ensure that we never empty out the cookie jar, that the cookie jar exists for moments of need such as these, and even at the current moment where we would benefit certainly from being extraordinarily generous, we have decided on what is prudent to ensure that there is always something left over. And not only that, that where we have the opportunity to top it back up. So it's a quite different scenario from introducing changes to rob the cookie jar. We've always ensured that we are prudent about it, that we make returns to it. As things evolved, just as it has in the past, ideas can be considered and adjustments made, but always with the view that we think about the future and not just about the now.
Over the past 19 years, I've had the joy of volunteering at Tribe, a social service agency that works with youth facing adversities. Our interventions to reduce offences and the recidivism rates are multifold. But one specific intervention has proven to be most effective in turning lives around. That is long-term mentorship that's consistent for at least a year. I believe that this intervention is not only effective for youth at risk, but for all youth facing challenging home circumstances. May I share life stories to illustrate 3 benefits long-term mentorship provides for our young. The first benefit is a safe space to process pain. Long-term mentorship provides our young an assurance that they are not alone in the challenges they face on a daily basis. Kai, a masked name, was raised in a violent home environment. He often fought in school and found himself expelled from both secondary and tertiary schools as he could not rid himself of his aggression. Over the 2 years of mentoring, Kai was able to then reflect on the consequences of his aggression, subsequently shifting his focus to working out his life goals. As Kai's mentor created time and space for him to feel understood, Kai sought help for his anger issue and is now meaningfully engaged in work. His friends have also noticed that he's experiencing better mental well-being. In the midst of sometimes unpredictable or painful circumstances, the consistency of the mentor's presence provides a safe environment and space for our young to process their feelings and thoughts for a more productive outcome in life. The second benefit of a consistent and long-term mentorship is the ability to help our young recognize his or her innate value beyond circumstance. The strengths and passion of our children and youth can sometimes be overshadowed by family circumstance. Long-term mentorship provides an avenue to help them discover and more accurately identify what they are. Abandoned by his parents when he was 7 years old, Ken was raised by his grandfather. Due to limited supervision, he lacked motivation to do well in school and eventually fell into bad company and vice. Things started to turn around when he said yes to mentoring 4 years ago. Ken grew to discover and appreciate his personal strengths and passion. He is now looking to pursue a stable career in engineering while freelancing as a barber. What's even more wonderful is that Ken has since reconciled with his family. As our young friends discover their innate value as individuals through mentorship, they grow to become contributing members of their families, their community, and the society at large. The third benefit of long-term mentorship is the ability to break out self-limiting habits and beliefs. A volunteer at a CDAC program for low-income children once asked an 11-year-old which school she would hope to go to after PSLE. This sweet girl then said as matter-of-factly, "Oh, can pass can already." The volunteer then asked, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" Without missing a beat, she replied, "Just help my father in his store, lor." For this 11-year-old, her response came not from excitement to support and eventually take over her father's business, but as her only perceived vocational option available to her, which eventually discouraged further efforts in her education. One of the largest hindrances in the healthy development of our young people, we note, is learned disempowering beliefs about themselves and their future, due to limited access to good counsel, financial and community resources. Mentors can show them a different way to live and challenge them to remove self-limiting beliefs so that they not only have the best possibilities in life, but be motivated to choose wisely. Such intervention takes time as these beliefs are often deep-seated. I am fully persuaded that lasting, sustainable change for our disadvantaged young will take place if we invest in long-term mentoring programs for them. My hope is that through CompLink, long-term mentoring will be of easy access for our 10 to 16-year-olds to effect mindset growth and a healthier worldview. I will now move on to the second initiative aligning to CompLink for our young friends, and this will be very brief, which is to facilitate personal saving habits. In 2015, POSB reintroduced the National School Savings Campaign to great response and participation by schools. This program currently requires the parents to set up the bank account for their children and to monitor it. I wish to raise for MSF's consideration the possibility of making enrollment to this program automatic for our children in low-income families. This will also see to creating a corresponding personal savings account for them, ideally complemented.
This is our ongoing fight against COVID, with close to 5 billion allocated to the COVID package. And I think this 5 billion is absolutely vital ammunition for testing, tracing, and vaccination. It bears reminding that there are already 2.5 million confirmed COVID deaths around the world to date, with many more unreported. In Singapore, the toll is 29 deaths. The government has done well in managing COVID here so far, and the COVID package will give the government the means to continue keeping all of us safe in 2021. But beyond COVID, we might as well start getting used to healthcare being the highest expenditure item and start getting used to numbers like 17 billion. Because in due time, even with COVID behind us, this would be our fiscal reality. For this year, already $500 million more has been set aside for more patient subsidies as 3 polyclinics open, for the ramp-up of Woodlands campus, for recruitment of manpower into these new facilities, and for MediShield Life premium support, as well as other forms of grants and financial assistance to Singaporeans. Within our social compact, the central question for the future of healthcare is this: how and how much would we, as a people, continue to care for one another in sickness and infirmity? One of my residents' parents came to Singapore to visit before COVID and could not go back home since last year. The parent declined in health, went in and out of hospital here as a non-Singaporean, and eventually passed on. The hospital bills came up to 5 digits, even in a C-class ward. I think his experience shows vividly the real cost of healthcare and the real difference that government subsidies for Singaporeans at the outset of care makes. And so subsidies must continue to be a central feature of healthcare here in order to keep it affordable for Singaporeans. But the challenge is, how might we, as a society, keep these subsidies going for the maximum benefit of all Singaporeans? Let me make 4 points. First, we have to try and contain cost per capita. In other words, the cost to care for each Singaporean on average. This is a difficult task as ever more tests and therapies rapidly become standard in care, and so we need to continue making tough decisions on standard